We have a new author on the show with us this morning. The book is called My Leaky Body. Julie Devaney, great to have you here on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
And really interesting concept. I'm going to read it. It says part memoir, part love story, part revolutionary pamphlet. And this was really your experience, spending 5 years in and out of hospital beds. And the writing really began after undergoing a surgery. If you can kind of go from that process on, because there's so much that has happened since, as to how this kind of came to be.
Yeah, sure. So I had gone through all these experiences. I'd had surgery, and I was lying in my hospital bed and suddenly realizing how difficult those times had been. And it was almost like it took until after surgery for me to finally crack. And I started writing. And the things I really wanted to get at were the ways that patients are often treated in healthcare scenarios. And so I started imagining this writing turning into me in a gown and doing workshops with staff and advocating for better quality of care. And so I started doing these workshops for staff. And so the final version of the book, years later, because that was in 2003, also includes those conversations when I started doing it as a workshop and when I started working with providers.
I mean, here you are, you're lying in a bed, and, you know, as you were saying, there's, 15 interns and doctors standing around you. You felt like you were already, on stage as it was.
Yeah.
That this was almost kind of putting it out on the other side.
Well, yeah, and I think the problem with being on stage that way is that they have all the lines, right? And I'm just lying there as the object. And so I think what I wanted it to be was to reframe that, and for me to be giving that experience as a patient.
As a patient, we're talking Crohn's, colitis. I mean, for you, there's not even a title to what it is. I mean, there were so many surgeries within the bowel system.
Yeah. Well,
there's no real name for what it is that you were going through, and that in itself is part of the journey.
Yeah, I was initially diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and then after surgery failed to cure it. My surgeon believes it's Crohn's disease. I still have specialists who think it's just a new kind of manifestation of ulcerative colitis. But at this point, to me, it's more important that in my day-to-day, I know how to live well, I know how to feel well, and that's more important to me than whatever the diagnosis is, and that is certainly the case now. So,
is there part medical aspects to this in the book, part your experience, and then there's also kind of switching it from, well, it was your experience with doctors and nurses, they also have started to tell you their stories as well as to what it's like from their perspective.
Yeah, and I think the way that I tell my stories and when I do the workshops is very raw, and we often laugh a lot because there's a lot of humor as it's kind of dark and absurd as we're going through these experiences, that it gave them an opportunity to feel like they could really talk about what was happening from their side in an honest way, and their real experiences of their bodies, which they don't get to do very often, and they're so often having to be very detached and the expert and professional, and that's what professional supposedly means. So I have some very, personal and enlightening stories from them about what it's like when a patient dies right in front of them and they have to walk into the next emerge booth and deal with someone else, and what those experiences actually mean and how we can be working together.
Would this be great for any individual, whether they're going through, a cancer treatment or a surgery, that it speaks to a lot of different people's experiences?
Yeah, that was one of the things that surprised me when I started performing it, was how many people with so many different experiences in the healthcare system, and not necessarily even personal, just going through it with a loved one or going through it as a professional, and how much it spoke to them, because it is the very honest. I don't always make myself look good in there, so.
And I think it's the honesty that people like.
Yeah.
Okay, so the workshop is happening tonight at Octopus Books in Centertown. So show starting?
7 p.m.
Okay.
And we'll be there for a few hours, and every time I do any kind of reading or performance, I always have my gown. It's always a bit of a show, so I'm really looking forward to talking to people in Ottawa and hearing people's stories too.
The workshop is happening once again, Octopus Books, 7:30, and that's at 251 at Bank Street. Tales from the Gurney. The book is called My Leaky Body. Great to meet you,
okay.
and great that through this process there was something that was really positive that came out of it. And have fun at the show tonight.
Thank you so much.